Welcome back. The U.S. and Russia laying the groundwork to end the war in Ukraine after talks in Saudi Arabia yesterday. The agreement calls for including appointing high-level teams to begin talks, discuss economic diplomatic outcomes, and restaff the nation's 2 embassies. Secretary of State Marco Rubio stressing this is just the beginning of finding a solution acceptable to all sides. One major sticking point includes new presidential elections in Ukraine. Here's President Trump on that.
We have a situation where we haven't had elections in Ukraine, where we have martial law, essentially martial law in Ukraine, where the leader in Ukraine, I mean, I hate to say it, but he's down at 4% approval rating, and where a country has been blown to smithereens. And I like him personally. He's fine. But I don't care about personally. I care about getting the job done. You have leadership now that's allowed a war to go on that should have never even happened, even without the United States.
Trump says he could meet with Vladimir Putin before the end of February. Joining me now is the head of the Global Magnitsky Justice Campaign, the CEO of Hermitage Capital Management, Sir Bill Browder. Bill, it's good to see you this morning. Thanks so much for being here. You've had plenty of run-ins with Vladimir Putin. Give us your reaction to all of this.
Well, Vladimir Putin, so my run-ins with Vladimir Putin was he murdered my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, and a bunch of other people, and he's been chasing me around the world ever since with death threats and so on. And so I know Vladimir Putin very well, and he's a very bad guy, a man who shouldn't be trusted. And so when I'm watching this whole thing playing itself out, I'm thinking to myself that we need to be more supportive of Ukraine, who are the victims, and a little bit less chummy with Putin, who is the aggressor in this whole situation. I find that at the end of the day, Putin could end this war in right this minute by just stopping. That's the thing. Ukraine is defending, Putin's attacking, and he could stop. And so that's what we should be pushing for. Yeah, it's a great point that you make. And it certainly felt in those comments from President Trump that he was more critical of Zelenskyy, certainly noting his lack of popularity with that 4% number in terms of the potential for elections. That number comes out of thin air. There's no 4% number. Zelensky's got a 52% approval rating, not a 4% approval rating. They're under attack. The reason they have martial law is because this country's been invaded. They have airstrikes every day from Russia. I think it's highly unfair for him to be critical of the victim. He should be critical of the person who's launching the airstrikes. And certainly when you think about, approval for Vladimir Putin, I mean, what are you going to say when you get the phone call? What do you think of Vladimir Putin? You better say you love him. So I don't believe anything on the Russia side either in terms of approval of Vladimir Putin. But what's your take on Ukraine not even being part of that peace talk yesterday? I mean, President Trump has made the point, look, he's been part of the talks for 3 years, but Zelenskyy makes the point that he wasn't at the table in Saudi Arabia, and he says he's not going to accept any outcome without being part of the talks. Here's what President Trump said about that. Watch.
They've had a seat for 3 years, and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago. Without the loss of much land, very little land, without the loss of any lives, and without the loss of cities that are just laying on their sides.
What do you think, Bill? Zelenskyy later canceled his own scheduled visit to Saudi Arabia following the talks.
Well, it's the whole thing, again, is Putin invaded Ukraine. Putin thought he was going to win in 3 days. And he didn't. And why didn't he win in 3 days? Because the Ukrainians bravely fought back, and they said, we don't want you to invade our country. We don't want you to kill our men, rape our women, and kidnap our children. This was not a time for negotiation. This was a time for them to defend themselves. And so there was no chance for any negotiation to happen. This was a brutal dictatorship invading a peaceful neighbor who didn't want to be invaded. And so I think President Trump is being very unfair to Vladimir Zelenskyy. It pains me to see him saying these things. I think that he should be supporting the victim in this thing, the democratically elected victim. Vladimir Putin has been a dictator for 25 years. He's taken over Georgia. He's carpet bombed Syria. He's done all sorts of terrible things. I think we need to understand who the good guys are and who the bad guys here. Ukraine is the good guys and Putin is the bad guy.
But, you know, Americans are frustrated with all of the hundreds of billions of dollars having been sent to Ukraine with no end in sight. I mean, what would you advise? Officials have discussed economic sanctions placed on Russia by the Biden administration at the start of the war. Here's Secretary of State Marco Rubio on that. Watch this.
There are sanctions that were imposed as a result of this conflict. And so I would say to you that in order to bring an end to any conflict, there has to be concessions made by all sides. And there are other parties that have sanctions. The European Union is going to have to be at the table at some point because they have sanctions.
What happens if those sanctions are removed, Bill? How do you see this playing out?
I think it would be a disaster if the sanctions are removed. The sanctions are putting pressure on Putin, putting economic pressure on him, which he obviously doesn't like. But I've got a solution for this whole thing, which I think President Trump would like, which is that when the war first started, we, meaning the United States, the European Union, UK, et cetera, froze $300 billion of Russian central bank reserves. That money is sitting in the West. And to the extent that everybody is upset with the cost of this war, and that's a justified feeling, why don't we, in order to continue to help Ukraine, why don't we take the money from Vladimir Putin, the $300 billion, and use that to fund their defense, fund the Ukrainians' defense? And by the way, guess where that money will be spent? It'll be spent on U.S. defense manufacturers. So it's like a win-win-win. Ukraine gets their money to defend themselves. We don't spend any more money. Vladimir Putin pays for it. And the U.S. companies make a lot of money. How could Donald Trump not like that?
And you know that Russia's not going to like that. But what are your thoughts on what the president has put together in terms of the rare earth minerals in Ukraine? There are some key conditions for continued support for Ukraine. According to sources in this, Ukraine must transfer 50% of all revenues from resource extraction licenses to the United States. The Investment Fund for Reconstruction will have exclusive powers to issue and manage licenses for that resource extraction. The U.S. will have the right of first refusal to purchase any minerals exported before Ukraine can sell them to other countries. Your thoughts?
Well, first of all, it further reads, and this is to pay back some exaggerated number that everybody thinks the United States has given Ukraine. So this is not for the future of Ukraine. This is to pay back what the United States gave before. And what I'll say is that, first of all, this is like war reparations from Ukraine, who's the victim. Russia should be handing over their natural resources for all the money that we've spent, not Ukraine. Ukraine needs to rebuild. They need to defend themselves. To punish Ukraine for the military aid that we've given them before seems like, you know, a highly unsympathetic position. And I'm not being in any way partisan here. I was at the Munich Security Conference last weekend, and I was meeting with Democrat senators and Republican senators, and there's no difference in the position on supporting Ukraine. Ukraine are the victims here. Putin is the criminal here. And that's how we have to look at this whole thing.
Yeah, and Russia is being supported now by China.
Russia is being supported by China. Russia is being supported by Iran.
Yeah.
And Russia is being supported by North Korea.
That's right.
This is the league of bad guys, and we are the good guys. We should be siding with the good guys.
Do you want to say anything about Magnitsky, your lawyer, who was murdered by Vladimir Putin, and where you are today in terms of Putin trying to hunt you down? Are you still afraid for your own life?
Absolutely. So in 2009, my lawyer, Sergei Magnitsky, was murdered after uncovering a corruption scheme in which Vladimir Putin was a personal beneficiary. He was murdered. I wasn't going to accept his murder. And I launched a campaign to get justice for him. And the campaign led to something called the Magnitsky Act, which was passed in the United States in 2012.
Yes. It's
been passed in Canada and UK, Australia, et cetera, EU. There are 35 countries that have it. And this is the legislation which has led to the freezing of all these assets around the world. And so Putin really doesn't like me because he values his money. And I was responsible for freezing a lot of it. And that's how we have to deal with Vladimir Putin. Not be nice to him, be tough with him.
Yep. Bill, all fair points. Great to see you this morning, sir. Thank you.